The flashing blue and red lights cut through the freezing midnight rain, reflecting in the rearview mirror of a 72-year-old grandmother. She wasn't just any grandmother. Officer Bradley Jenkins thought he had pulled over another easy target in his affluent, gated jurisdiction. Someone he could bully, intimidate, and break to feed his own ego. He slapped the cuffs on her wrinkled wrists, ignoring her calm warnings. By sunrise, he wouldn't just lose his badge. The state's highest powers would descend upon his precinct, delivering a brutal, unforgettable dose of absolute karma. The relentless, freezing rain of late November battered the windshield of the midnight blue Mercedes S-Class as it cruised down the winding, heavily wooded stretch of Oakmont Hills. It was past 1 in the morning. Oakmont was the kind of ultra-exclusive, deeply insulated suburban enclave where manicured lawns stretched for acres, and the local police force acted more like an armed private security firm for the ultra-rich than public servants. Behind the wheel sat Evelyn Reed. At 72 years old, Evelyn was a woman carved from granite and grace. For 42 years, she had worked as a neonatal intensive care nurse at the city's most underfunded public hospital, saving the lives of premature infants whose parents couldn't afford private care. She had retired with honors, a pension, and the undying respect of her community. Tonight, she was returning from a high-profile charity gala, downtown, organized by the State Children's Fund. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored emerald green evening gown, a string of authentic South Sea pearls resting against her collarbone. She was tired, her bones aching slightly from the damp chill, but her mind was at peace. She just wanted a cup of decaf tea and her warm bed. 2 miles behind her, idling in the dark cutout of a closed gas station, sat Patrol Car 42, occupied by Officer Bradley Jenkins. Jenkins was a man whose entire personality was built around the tiny metal shield pinned to his chest. At 34, he was already bitter, passed over for promotion twice due to what internal reviews diplomatically called escalation tendencies. In reality, Jenkins was a textbook profile in prejudice and unchecked aggression. He viewed the pristine streets of Oakmont as his personal kingdom, and he had a very specific, deeply flawed idea of who belonged in it and who didn't. As Evelyn's Mercedes passed his hiding spot, Jenkins's eyes narrowed. The car was pristine, expensive, and driven by a black woman late at night in a neighborhood that was 98% white. To Jenkins, that wasn't a citizen heading home. That was a red flag. He didn't care that the car was obeying the speed limit perfectly. He pulled out, the engine of his Dodge Charger roaring, and began tailing her. Evelyn noticed the headlights immediately. Her hands tightened slightly on the leather-wrapped steering wheel, the muscle memory of decades of living in a world that often demanded she prove her right to exist kicking in. She checked her speed. 35 in a 35 zone. She checked her blinkers, her mirrors. Everything was perfect. Jenkins followed her for 1.5 miles, waiting for a mistake. When she didn't make one, he decided to manufacture his own cause. A slight splash of mud from a puddle obscured the left corner of her license plate. It was a flimsy excuse, one that would get thrown out of any traffic court in the country. But out here, in the dark, on a lonely road, Jenkins was the law. He hit the lights. The interior of Evelyn's car was instantly bathed in the harsh, strobing glare of red and blue. Evelyn let out a slow, measured breath, signaling carefully before pulling onto the wide gravel shoulder. She put the car in park, turned off the engine, turned on her interior dome light, and placed both her hands flat on the top of the steering wheel. She knew the drill. In his cruiser, Jenkins called it in. "Dispatch, I've got a late model Mercedes, out of jurisdiction tags. Mud obscuring the plate. initiating a stop en route 1999. "Copy that, Unit 42, the dispatcher replied, her voice crackling over the radio. Jenkins stepped out into the freezing rain, pulling his heavy waterproof collar up, his hand instinctively resting on the butt of his sidearm. He approached the passenger side first, shining his high-powered maglite directly into the cabin, sweeping it aggressively across the leather seats, the floorboards, and finally directly into Evelyn's eyes. She winced, turning her head slightly but keeping her hands firmly on the wheel. "Good evening, officer," she said, her voice steady, carrying the natural authority of a woman who had spent 4 decades commanding chaotic hospital wards. Jenkins tapped the window hard with the metal end of his flashlight. "Roll it down, all the way." Evelyn pressed the button, and the cold, wet air rushed into the warm cabin. "Is there a problem, officer?" "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Jenkins barked, ignoring her question. He leaned in, letting the rain drip from his hat onto her passenger seat. "Whose car is this?" "It is mine," Evelyn replied calmly. "My son purchased it for me." "Your son, huh?" Jenkins sneered, his flashlight lingering on the expensive pearl necklace around her neck. "And what does your son do that he can afford a $120,000 car? Or maybe you just borrowed it for the night?" Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she did not take the bait. "My son is extremely hard-working. Now my license is in my evening bag on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach for it slowly. Is that acceptable to you?" "Just get the ID," Jenkins snapped, annoyed by her articulate speech and absolute lack of intimidation. He was used to panic. He fed on fear. Evelyn's profound composure felt like a direct challenge to his authority. She unclasped her small velvet clutch, retrieved her driver's license and the registration slip, and handed them across the console. Jenkins snatched them. He looked at the name. Evelyn Reed. The address listed was in a prestigious, gated community just 3 miles away. Jenkins frowned, a spark of irrational anger flaring in his chest. He didn't like being wrong. "Address says you live in the Pines. Long way from the city for someone like you." "I have lived in the Pines for 3 years," Evelyn said, looking him dead in the eye. "Now, officer, could you please explain why I was pulled over?" "I was strictly adhering to the speed limit." "Your plate is obstructed," Jenkins lied smoothly. "And you were swerving. You been drinking tonight, Evelyn?" "I do not consume alcohol. I was driving perfectly straight." "I determine how you were driving, not you." Jenkins raised his voice, the power trip fully engaging. "Step out of the vehicle." Evelyn stared at him. The rain was coming down in sheets now, near freezing. "Officer, I am 72 years old. It is pouring rain. I am in a silk dress. You have my identification. Write me a citation for the license plate if you must, but I am not stepping out into a storm." Jenkins's face flushed crimson. To him, this wasn't a reasonable request from an elderly woman. It was defiance, and defiance had to be punished. "I am giving you a lawful order," Jenkins shouted, pulling his radio mic. "Step out of the car right now, or I will drag you out for resisting." Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief second. She knew how these stories ended. She knew the statistics. She knew the danger of a man with a badge and a fragile ego in the dark. Slowly, deliberately, she unbuckled her seatbelt. "I am complying," she said quietly. She pushed the heavy door open and stepped out into the freezing deluge. The icy rain instantly soaked through her elegant gown, plastering it to her frail shoulders. She shivered violently, hugging her arms across her chest. "Turn around. Put your hands on the roof of the car," Jenkins ordered, walking around the back of the Mercedes to reach her. "This is completely unnecessary," Evelyn said, her voice shaking from the cold, though her spirit remained unbroken. "You are making a terrible mistake, young man. You do not know who I am." "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," Jenkins snarled, grabbing her wrists. He pulled her arms down, roughly behind her back. Evelyn gasped in pain as her shoulder, arthritic from years of lifting patience, flared with agony. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clamped down on her wrists, biting into her skin. They were ratcheted entirely too tight. "You are under arrest for suspicion of driving under the influence, failure to maintain a lane, and resisting a lawful order," Jenkins recited, practically dragging her toward his cruiser. "I demand you let me make a phone call," Evelyn said, stumbling as the rain slicked the asphalt beneath her evening shoes. "You don't demand anything." Jenkins shoved her into the hard plastic back seat of the police cruiser, slamming the door shut. Inside the cage, Evelyn sat dripping, her shoulders aching, the tight metal cuffs bruising her wrists. She looked out through the rain-streaked window at Jenkins, who was now casually rummaging through her Mercedes, tossing her expensive velvet clutch onto the floorboard, searching for some illicit justification for his ego-driven stop. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just watched him with a cold, terrifying clarity. She knew exactly what she was going to do the moment she got to a telephone. The Oakmont Hills 4th Precinct was a state-of-the-art facility, funded heavily by local property taxes. It smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and institutional arrogance. At 2:15 a.m., the precinct was mostly dead, save for a few night shift officers typing up reports, and Desk Sergeant Greg Miller, a 20-year veteran who was 2 years away from a plush retirement. Miller was a man who preferred a quiet shift. He liked his crossword puzzles and his lukewarm decaf. The heavy glass double doors slid open, bringing in a gust of freezing wind and the heavy footfalls of Officer Bradley Jenkins. Behind him, he was frog-marching Evelyn Reed. Sergeant Miller looked up from his desk, his pen pausing over an 8-letter word for catastrophe. He blinked, processing the scene. Jenkins, looking puffed up and triumphant, was holding the arm of a shivering, soaked, elderly black woman wearing a ruined emerald evening gown and a pearl necklace. She looked like a dignitary who had been caught in a shipwreck. "What do we have here, Brad?" Miller asked, a sudden knot of unease forming in his gut. "Caught one prowling out on Route 119, Jenkins declared loudly, ensuring the 2 other officers in the bullpen heard him. "Suspicion of DUI, resisting, and I'm betting the vehicle might be stolen or tied to those burglaries we had last month. Driving a brand new S-Class. Kept giving me lip." Miller frowned, looking closely at Evelyn. Despite the soaked hair plastered to her forehead and the visible tremors rocking her thin frame, her posture was impeccable. She wasn't looking at the floor in shame. She was looking directly at the precinct's surveillance camera in the corner of the ceiling. "Ma'am?" Miller asked cautiously. "Are you injured?" "My wrists are bleeding," Evelyn stated clearly, her voice echoing in the quiet lobby. "And my shoulder was injured when this officer forcibly restrained me without cause." Jenkins rolled his eyes, shoving her toward a heavy wooden bench bolted to the wall. He unclipped one cuff from her left wrist and brutally reattached it to an iron ring on the wall, forcing her to sit in a twisted, uncomfortable position. "She's dramatic. Give me the booking forms, Greg." Miller hesitated. "Brad, you sure about this? Did she blow on the breathalyzer?" "Refused," Jenkins lied effortlessly. In truth, he hadn't even offered one, knowing she was stone-cold sober. "I'll get a warrant for blood work if I have to. Let her sit there and cool off. She thinks she's untouchable." Evelyn sat on the hard wooden bench, the wet fabric of her dress clinging to her freezing skin. The precinct was kept at a brisk 68 degrees to keep the officers alert, but to a soaked 72-year-old woman, it felt like a meat locker. She closed her eyes, practicing the deep breathing exercises she used to teach expectant mothers. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Control the pain. control the narrative. An hour passed. Jenkins sat at a desk across the room, loudly regaling another officer with a highly exaggerated version of the traffic stop, painting himself as a hero dealing with a dangerous, belligerent suspect. She tried to pull the "Do you know who I am" card. Jenkins laughed, taking a bite of a powdered donut. Like I give a damn. Nobody outranks the badge on the side of the road. Finally, Sergeant Miller couldn't take the quiet intensity of the woman chained to his wall. He walked over, carrying a styrofoam cup of warm water. "Mom, you want some water?" he offered softly. Evelyn looked up at him, her dark eyes piercing straight through his conscience. "I want my phone call, Sergeant. By law, I am entitled to make one telephone call. You have held me for 83 minutes without formally charging me, without reading me my Miranda rights, and without medical attention for the lacerations on my wrists." Miller swallowed hard. She spoke with the precision of a prosecuting attorney. He looked over at Jenkins, who waved a dismissive hand. "Let her call her public defender," Jenkins scoffed, "or her son, the supposed millionaire." Miller unlocked the cuff from the iron ring, though he left her hands bound in front of her. He escorted her behind the booking desk to a heavy, black, landline phone mounted on the wall. "Local calls only, Mum, unless you have a calling card." "I know the number," Evelyn said. Her hands were shaking so badly from the cold that Miller almost offered to dial for her, but she managed to pick up the receiver. She punched in a 10-digit number. It wasn't a local area code. It was the 202 area code, Washington, D.C., but it forwarded directly to a secure, private cell phone. She waited through 3 rings. At 3:30 a.m., she knew he would be asleep, but this specific number was designed to bypass all his silent modes and sleep settings. It was his emergency family line. On the 4th ring, the line clicked open. A deep, gravelly voice, heavy with sleep but instantly alert, answered. "Mum, is everything okay? Are you hurt?" Evelyn's voice broke for the very first time that night, just a fraction, hearing the voice of her boy. "Thomas, I need your help." In the capital city, 200 miles away, Senator Thomas Reed sat straight up in his king-sized bed. Thomas was 42 years old, a former civil rights litigator who had skyrocketed through state politics to become one of the most powerful and feared legislators in the region. As the chairman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, he controlled the purse strings for every state agency, including law enforcement. He was a man known for his brilliant mind, his ruthless political maneuvering, and his absolute, unwavering devotion to his mother, the woman who had scrubbed hospital floors and worked double shifts to put him through Yale law. "Mum, what's wrong? Where are you?" Thomas swung his legs out of bed, the sleep vanishing from his brain in a microsecond, replaced by a cold, sharpened adrenaline. "I'm at the Oakmont Hills 4th Precinct," Evelyn said, her teeth beginning to chatter. "I was pulled over on my way home from the Children's Fund Gala. The officer, he was very aggressive, Tommy. He put me in handcuffs. He made me stand in the freezing rain. I'm soaked, and my wrists are bleeding." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't an empty silence. It was the sound of a vacuum forming right before an explosion. "What is his name?" Thomas asked. His voice was no longer the voice of a concerned son. It was the voice of a man who was about to dismantle an entire institution, brick by brick. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder. Jenkins was still laughing at his desk, completely oblivious. "Officer Bradley Jenkins. Shield number 18842. Are you in a cell?" "I am standing at the booking desk. They had me chained to a bench." "Mum, listen to me very carefully," Thomas said, his tone chillingly calm. "Do not say another word to them. Do not answer any questions. Do not accept any water or food from them. I am leaving right now. I will be there in exactly 2 hours, and I am bringing hell with me." "Drive safe, Tommy," Evelyn whispered, and hung up the phone. Miller, who had been listening to her side of the conversation, felt that knot of unease twist into genuine nausea. "Did you get a hold of someone, Mom?" "I did," Evelyn said, holding out her bruised wrists for Miller to put the handcuffs back on. "He is on his way. In his penthouse apartment in the capital, Senator Thomas Reed didn't just get dressed, he armed himself for war. He threw on a crisp white shirt, a dark navy suit, and a crimson tie, his movements brutally efficient. He grabbed his encrypted state-issued phone and made his first call. It wasn't to a lawyer. It was to a man who owed him his political life. It took 5 rings for the governor's mansion operator to answer. "Executive residence, how may I direct your call? This is Senator Thomas Reed. Wake up Governor Hayes. Right now." The operator paused, clearly taken aback. "Senator, it is 3:40 in the morning. The governor left strict instructions not to be disturbed unless it is a state emergency. If he does not pick up this phone in the next 30 seconds, Thomas said, his voice dropping an octave, radiating pure menace. "There won't be a state budget passed for the next 3 years. I will personally freeze every highway, education, and infrastructure initiative he campaigned on. You tell him Thomas Reed is on the line, and it is a matter of life, death, and his political survival." "Please hold, Senator." Less than a minute later, the line clicked. Governor Richard Hayes sounded groggy and irritated. "Thomas, do you know what time it is? We finalized the union negotiations at midnight. What could possibly—" "Richard," Thomas interrupted, using the governor's first name, a deliberate breach of protocol that immediately signaled the severity of the situation. 45 minutes ago, a rogue cop in the Oakmont Hills Police Department pulled over my 72-year-old mother. He dragged her out of her car in a freezing rainstorm, handcuffed her until she bled, and has chained her to a wall in the 4th precinct without charging her. The irritation in Governor Hayes's voice vanished instantly, replaced by a cold shock. Richard Hayes knew Evelyn Reed. He had sat next to her at Thomas's swearing-in ceremony. He knew she was the beloved matriarch of a politically connected, incredibly influential family. "Jesus Christ," Hayes breathed. "Thomas, I don't want your apologies, Richard. I want your authority," Thomas snapped, walking briskly toward his private elevator. "I am getting in my car right now. I want the state police commissioner awake. I want the attorney general on standby. And I want you to understand that if a single hair on my mother's head is out of place when I arrive, I am not just going to sue Oakmont Hills. I am going to launch a Senate investigation into every dime of state funding that precinct receives, and I will tear their department down to the studs. Consider it done," the governor said firmly, fully awake now, calculating the immense political fallout. A racist, abusive traffic stop involving the mother of the highest-ranking black legislator in the state? It was a powder keg that could burn down his entire administration if he didn't handle it perfectly. "Thomas, I will have Commissioner Vance." Thomas cut him off. "I don't care who you send. Just make sure they have the authority to relieve a man of his badge on the spot. I'll see you at sunrise." Thomas ended the call. As the elevator doors opened to the underground garage, his private security detail, 2 off-duty state troopers who adored the senator, were already waiting by his black Lincoln Navigator, alerted by his sudden movement on the tracking app. "Where to, boss?" asked Sergeant Miller, no relation to the desk sergeant, but a hardened state trooper named Dave. "Oakmont Hills 4th Precinct," Thomas said, sliding into the back seat. "And Dave, use the sirens. I don't care about the speed limit tonight." Back in the capital, Governor Hayes was a whirlwind. He stood in his pajamas in the residence office, barking orders at his chief of staff, "Wake up Captain Donovan of the State Police Internal Affairs Division," Hayes commanded. "Tell him to mobilize a tactical audit team. I want a convoy heading to Oakmont Hills right now. I want the chief of Oakmont Police dragged out of his bed and brought to that precinct." His chief of staff, furiously typing on a tablet, looked up. "Sir, Oakmont is a local municipality, sending State Police IA directly to a local precinct in the middle of the night. It's highly irregular. The police union will go ballistic." Governor Hayes slammed his hand down on the mahogany desk, the sharp crack echoing in the quiet room. "I don't give a damn about the union right now. That idiot cop just arrested Evelyn Reed. Do you understand the sheer magnitude of this screw-up? Thomas Reed can bankrupt this state with a stroke of his pen in the Ways and Means Committee. We are going to hand him this officer's badge on a silver platter before the morning news cycle catches wind of this, or we are all politically dead." 50 miles away, completely shielded in his bubble of ignorance and arrogance, Officer Bradley Jenkins poured himself another cup of terrible precinct coffee. He glanced over at Evelyn, who was sitting silently on the bench, shivering slightly, but staring straight ahead with an unnerving calm. "You know, you could make this easy on yourself, Evelyn," Jenkins taunted, leaning against the counter. "Just admit you had a few drinks at whatever fancy party you snuck into. I write you a ticket, you call a cab, and you go back to the city." Evelyn slowly turned her head to look at him. There was no fear in her eyes, only a deep, profound pity that made Jenkins instantly uncomfortable. "Officer Jenkins," she said softly, her voice steady despite the cold settling into her bones. "In my 40 years as a nurse, I have learned that the universe has a very precise way of balancing its scales. You have built a career on bullying people who you believe have no power." She paused, looking past him to the dark windows at the front of the precinct. "But you chose the wrong car tonight," she whispered, "and the scales are about to balance." Jenkins laughed, a loud, harsh sound, trying to shake off the sudden chill that had run down his spine. "Right, whatever you say, lady. It's just you, me, and the graveyard shift. Nobody's coming to save you." He took a sip of his coffee, completely unaware that on Interstate 95, 3 black state police SUVs, accompanied by a Lincoln Navigator with its hazard lights flashing, were tearing through the rain at 110 miles an hour, carrying a storm that would end his career before breakfast. At 4:10 a.m., Police Chief William Harper of the Oakmont Hills Department was abruptly pulled from a deep sleep by the frantic buzzing of his bedside phone. Harper was a man who enjoyed the perks of his wealthy jurisdiction, golf on Thursdays, catered lunches, and a community that rarely demanded actual police work. He answered the phone expecting a noise complaint about a teenager's house party. Instead, he heard the voice of the governor's chief of staff. "Chief Harper, this is the executive office in the Capitol. Are you awake?" "I am now," Harper mumbled, sitting up, his heart rate spiking at the sheer impossibility of the caller. "What is the emergency?" "The emergency, Chief, is that your department has approximately 5 minutes to brace for impact. One of your patrolmen, a Bradley Jenkins, has unlawfully detained Evelyn Reed. Does that name mean anything to you?" Harper felt the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin icy and clammy. "Senator Thomas Reed's mother? The Ways and Means chairman?" "The very same." The voice on the phone was razor-sharp, devoid of any professional courtesy. "Senator Reed is arriving at your 4th precinct right now. He is accompanied by State Police Internal Affairs. Governor Hayes expects your immediate presence at that precinct. If Senator Reed decides to dismantle your town's funding, the governor will not stop him. You better pray to whatever God you believe in that Evelyn Reed is unharmed. Get moving." The line went dead. Harper dropped the phone, scrambling out of bed so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet, a cold sweat drenching his back. 10 miles away, The quiet stillness of the 4th Precinct was shattered. Officer Bradley Jenkins was leaning back in his swivel chair, his boots resting on a desk, scrolling through a sports betting app on his phone. Desk Sergeant Miller was quietly updating the custody log, casting nervous glances at Evelyn, who remained chained to the wooden bench. The puddle of water beneath her ruined emerald dress had grown, and her shivering was now visibly violent, her lips tinted a dangerous shade of blue. At 4:16 a.m., the heavy glass double doors of the precinct did not simply open, they were violently shoved apart. The wind and rain howled into the lobby, followed immediately by 4 massive men in the dark, imposing tactical uniforms of the state police. Their badges gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. They moved with military precision, fanning out across the room and instantly taking control of the space. Jenkins dropped his phone, his boots slamming onto the floor. He instinctively reached for his duty belt. "Hey, what the hell is this? You can't just barge in. Hand away from the firearm, officer," barked Captain Donovan, a seasoned internal affairs veteran with eyes like chipped flint. He didn't yell, but his voice carried an absolute, undeniable authority that froze Jenkins in his tracks. Then, Senator Thomas Reed walked through the doors. Thomas was a towering figure, his navy suit immaculately pressed despite the frantic drive. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment he crossed the threshold. He completely ignored Jenkins and the other officers, his eyes sweeping the room until they landed on the wooden bench. When Thomas saw his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, soaked to the bone, shivering, her wrists bruised and bleeding under the bite of steel handcuffs, something inside the powerful politician snapped. The calculated, composed legislator vanished, replaced by a son consumed by a quiet, terrifying rage. He crossed the lobby in 3 long strides, falling to his knees right into the puddle of freezing water in his $1,000 suit. He stripped off his heavy wool overcoat and wrapped it gently around Evelyn's trembling shoulders. "Mum, I'm here, I've got you," Thomas whispered, his hands hovering over the bloody abrasions on her wrists. Evelyn looked at him, a weak, tired smile touching her lips. "You made good time, Tommy." Thomas stood up slowly, his eyes locking onto Desk Sergeant Miller, who was standing completely paralyzed behind the high counter. "Take these cuffs off her," Thomas said. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it echoed with the force of a bomb threat. "Take them off her right this second." Miller fumbled frantically for his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. He scrambled around the desk, terrified. "Hold on a second!" Jenkins shouted, finally finding his voice, his ego refusing to let him back down in his own precinct. "She is my prisoner! She is under arrest for suspicion of DUI and resisting a lawful order. You can't just come in here and—" Thomas didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply turned his head, fixing Jenkins with a stare so lethally cold that Jenkins' words died in his throat. "Captain Donovan," Thomas said, not breaking eye contact with Jenkins. Donovan stepped forward, unrolling a crisp legal document. "Officer Bradley Jenkins, by the emergency executive order of Governor Richard Hayes, you are hereby relieved of your duties, pending a full state-level investigation. You will surrender your badge, your firearm, and your credentials immediately." Jenkins's jaw dropped. The arrogance that had fueled him for years evaporated in a single, crushing second. "The governor? Over a traffic stop? You've got to be kidding me. She was swerving. She refused a breathalyzer. It's my word against hers." At that exact moment, the precinct doors slid open again, and Chief Harper sprinted in. He was wearing his uniform trousers and a civilian jacket, zipped up haphazardly, his hair a mess, panting heavily. He took one look at the state troopers, Senator Thomas Reed kneeling by his mother, and Jenkins standing in the center of the room. Harper knew instantly that his department was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Senator Reed," Chief Harper gasped, practically begging. "I am so deeply sorry. I had no idea." "Save it, Chief," Thomas interrupted, helping his mother to her feet as Miller finally managed to unlock the bloody handcuffs. A state police medic who had followed the convoy immediately rushed in with a trauma kit, guiding Evelyn to a warmer room to treat her wounds and check her vitals. Thomas turned his full, devastating attention back to Jenkins, who was now visibly sweating, looking between his chief and the state troopers. "You think this is your word against hers, Officer Jenkins?" Thomas asked, stepping closer. "You think because it was dark and raining and there were no witnesses, that you could just invent a narrative to justify your prejudice?" "I know what I saw," Jenkins lied desperately, doubling down because it was the only defense he had left. Her license plate was obscured, and she crossed the double yellow line. When I asked her to step out, she became hostile and physically resisted. "That's the truth." "The truth," Thomas said, pulling a sleek, state-issued tablet from his briefcase, "is that you are a relic of a bygone era. Too stupid to realize that the world has outpaced your corruption." Thomas tapped the screen of the tablet and turned it around so Jenkins, Chief Harper, and Captain Donovan could all see. "My mother drives a custom 2026 Mercedes-Benz S-Class Guard Edition," Thomas explained, his tone clinical and merciless. "It is a vehicle designed for diplomats and high-risk executives. It doesn't just have a dash cam. It is equipped with a biometric safe driving suite and a continuous 360-degree, high-definition, surround-view recording system. It records infrared video and high-fidelity audio up to 30 feet in every direction. And most importantly, Officer Jenkins, it uploads that data to a secure, private cloud server in real time." Jenkins's face lost all color. He looked like a man who had just been handed his own death warrant. Thomas hit play. The tablet screen displayed a crystal-clear, split-screen video feed. One angle showed the dark road ahead, proving Evelyn was driving perfectly straight, well within her lane, at exactly the speed limit. Another angle showed Jenkins's cruiser idling in the dark gas station, pulling out aggressively to tailgate her. Then, the audio kicked in. The microphone had picked up the exact moment Jenkins tapped the glass with his flashlight. The entire exchange played out in undeniable, horrifying clarity. Evelyn's calm, compliant voice, Jenkins' aggressive, sneering insults, the lack of any slur or sign of intoxication from Evelyn. And then, the exterior cameras captured the moment Jenkins ordered her out into the freezing rain, grabbed her wrists, and violently wrenched her arms behind her back, clearly causing her immense pain, while she offered zero physical resistance. The video ended. The silence in the precinct was deafening, broken only by the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. Chief Harper looked sick to his stomach. Desk Sergeant Miller looked away, ashamed of his own complicity in not intervening. "No swerving," Thomas stated, dropping his arms to his sides. "No resisting. No obscured plate. The rear camera shows it was perfectly clean. You profiled her. You targeted her. You tortured a 72-year-old woman in the freezing rain to satisfy your own pathetic ego." Jenkins swallowed hard, taking a step back, his hands shaking. I can explain. It was a high-stress situation. The lighting. "Shut up, Brad," Chief Harper snapped, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and fear. He walked over to Jenkins and held out his hand. "Give me your badge and your gun. Right now." "Chief, you can't let them do this," Jenkins pleaded, his tough guy facade entirely shattered, revealing the cowardly bully underneath. "The Union will back me. You know how these stops go." The Union, Captain Donovan interjected, stepping up beside the chief, was briefed on this footage 10 minutes ago by the governor's office. They have officially declined to offer you legal representation. You are entirely on your own, Mr. Jenkins. The use of Mr. Jenkins instead of officer was the final nail in the coffin. Bradley Jenkins slowly unclipped his duty belt, the heavy leather and metal thudding onto the linoleum floor. He unpinned the silver shield from his chest, his fingers trembling so violently he pricked his thumb on the clasp and dropped it into his chief's open hand. "You're done," Thomas said softly, the absolute finality of his words echoing in the quiet lobby. "But we are not, because losing your job is merely the administrative consequence. The real karma begins at sunrise. By 6 a.m., the freezing rain had finally stopped, giving way to a pale, cold, and unforgiving dawn. Bradley Jenkins drove home in his personal civilian truck, a 2018 Ford F-150, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He was exhausted, terrified, and utterly stripped of the armor that had defined his entire adult life. He no longer had a badge, a gun, or the backing of the thin blue line. He thought he could just go home, lock his doors and wait for the storm to blow over. He believed, with the stubborn arrogance of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his life, that a good defense attorney could spin the narrative. He was entirely wrong. Senator Thomas Reed was not a man who fought in the shadows. He was a master of the modern, digitized battlefield of public opinion and legal warfare. At exactly 7 a.m., just as the morning news cycle was hitting its peak viewership, a carefully edited 3-minute clip of the Mercedes-Benz dashcam footage was blasted to every major national news outlet. Jenkins had barely pulled his truck into his driveway in a modest, middle-class suburb when his phone began to vibrate violently. It was a barrage of text messages, missed calls, and automated news alerts. He looked down at the illuminated screen. CNN breaking news. Outrage in Oakmont Hills. As horrific dashcam footage shows local officer torturing 72-year-old mother of prominent state senator. The New York Times. A disgusting abuse of power. State governor demands federal probe after viral traffic stop. Reuters. Oakmont Hills. Police union president publicly disavows Officer Bradley Jenkins, citing indefensible and rogue actions. Jenkins stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. The union had dumped him. In less than 3 hours, the political machinery had completely isolated him. He walked into his house, a stark, quiet building. His fiancée, Sarah, was standing in the kitchen, dressed in her nursing scrubs, staring at the television screen mounted on the wall. The morning anchors on MSNBC were playing the footage on a continuous, damning loop. The audio of Jenkins sneering, "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," echoed through his own living room. Sarah slowly turned to look at him. She didn't look angry, she looked utterly horrified. She worked with the elderly. She knew what throwing a 72-year-old woman to the ground and wrenching her arms behind her back in a freezing rainstorm could do to a fragile body. "Is that you?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "Sarah, babe, it's out of context," Jenkins stammered, stepping toward her. "The video. It doesn't show the whole story. She was resisting." "I have eyes, Brad," she said, her voice shaking as she backed away from him. "She is in a silk dress. She is terrified. And you look like a monster. You sounded like you were enjoying it." She didn't wait for his rebuttal. She walked past him, grabbed her keys from the counter, and walked out the front door. Jenkins was left standing alone in his kitchen as the sound of the television continued to broadcast his absolute ruin to millions of viewers. By 8:30 a.m., the Capitol was in an uproar. Senator Thomas Reed stood at the podium in the State House briefing room. He was flanked by the governor, the attorney general, and the regional director of the ACLU. The room was packed, shoulder to shoulder with reporters, the bright flashes of cameras illuminating Thomas's stoic, furious face. "Last night," Thomas began, his voice ringing with a powerful rhythmic cadence. "A man who swore an oath to protect and serve decided to play God on a dark road in Oakmont Hills. He targeted my mother, Evelyn Reed, a woman who spent 42 years saving premature infants in our state's most underfunded wards. He targeted her because of the color of her skin, the car she was driving, and his own unchecked, festering prejudice." Thomas paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. "But we are not here simply to terminate one rogue officer. We are here to dismantle the system that allowed him to exist." Thomas formally announced the immediate freezing of all state grant funding to the Oakmont Hills Police Department, pending a top-to-bottom audit by the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. He introduced an emergency legislative package named the Evelyn Act, which mandated that all police cruisers in the state be equipped with real-time cloud-uploading camera systems, bypassing local precinct storage, where footage mysteriously went missing. Furthermore, he announced that a massive civil rights lawsuit had already been filed in federal court. He wasn't just relying on state prosecutors. He had retained the powerhouse legal team from Kirkland & Ellis, one of the most ruthless corporate and civil litigation firms in the world, to sue the town of Oakmont Hills, the police department, and Bradley Jenkins personally. Back in Oakmont Hills, Chief William Harper was packing his office into cardboard boxes. The mayor had demanded his resignation at 7:15 a.m. to try and save the town's reputation. The precinct was swarming with state police investigators, seizing hard drives, use-of-force reports, and personnel files. They were looking into every single arrest Bradley Jenkins had ever made. By noon, the news vans had found Jenkins's house. They parked on his lawn, blocking his driveway. Neighbors, the very people Jenkins thought respected him, were giving interviews to reporters, talking about how aggressive and unpleasant he had always been. The social karma was immediate and absolute. He was a pariah in his own community. The wheels of justice, usually slow, moved with terrifying, blinding speed when driven by the united wrath of a grieving son, a panicked political establishment, and a public hungry for accountability. 3 months later, the federal courthouse in the capital city was surrounded by barricades. Inside courtroom 4B, the Honorable Judge Theodore Carmichael, a notoriously strict, no-nonsense jurist appointed a decade prior, stared down from his high bench. Bradley Jenkins sat at the defense table. The 3 months had aged him a decade. He was gaunt, his hair thinning, his arrogant posture replaced by a slumped, defeated slouch. His legal defense was a disaster, because the union had abandoned him, and the town's insurance provider, Munich Re, had refused to indemnify his criminal actions. He had been forced to liquidate his savings, his retirement fund, and sell his truck just to afford a mid-tier defense attorney. He was facing federal charges under Title 18, U.S.C., Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. The trial lasted only 4 days. The defense tried to argue that Jenkins felt threatened, that he made a procedural error in the heat of the moment. But the prosecution didn't need to argue. They simply played the Mercedes-Benz surveillance footage on the massive high-definition screens in the courtroom. They played it in slow motion. They played the crystal-clear audio. They brought the emergency room doctor to the stand, who detailed the severe lacerations on Evelyn Reed's wrists, the deep tissue bruising, and the torn rotator cuff in her shoulder that required surgery, an injury directly caused by Jenkins wrenching her arm upward. Then, Evelyn Reed took the stand. She wore a simple, elegant, grey suit. Her right arm was in a sling. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She looked directly at the jury and recounted the events of that night with the precise, unflinching clinical accuracy of a seasoned medical professional. When the prosecutor asked her how she felt during the ordeal, Evelyn looked across the courtroom, her eyes locking onto Jenkins for the first time since that freezing night. "I was not afraid for my life," she said softly, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "I was profoundly sad. Sad that a man entrusted with so much power had so little humanity. He did not see a citizen. He saw an object to be broken, and I knew, in that moment, that if he did this to me, he had done it to others who did not have a son with a voice loud enough to stop him." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. During the sentencing hearing a week later, Judge Carmichael looked down at Jenkins with a gaze of unadulterated contempt. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge began, his voice echoing in the dead-silent courtroom, "you used the authority granted to you by the state not as a shield for the vulnerable, but as a weapon for your own ego. You tortured a 72-year-old public servant. You lied on your official reports. You are a disgrace to the badge you wore." The judge struck his gavel. "I sentence you to 48 months in a federal correctional institution without the possibility of early parole." Jenkins collapsed into his chair, weeping silently as the U.S. Marshals approached him. The tough, aggressive cop who loved to put people in cages was handcuffed, his own wrists secured behind his back, and led out of the courtroom to begin a new life at the bottom of the prison hierarchy, where former police officers were treated with absolute, terrifying hostility. The karma was absolute. He was financially ruined, socially exiled, legally convicted, and robbed of his freedom. In the aftermath, the town of Oakmont Hills settled the Kirkland and Ellis civil lawsuit for a staggering $8.5 million paid out by their municipal insurance. Evelyn Reed refused to keep a single dime of it for herself. Instead, she established the Oakmont Justice and Care Foundation. Half the money went into a permanent scholarship fund for minority students entering the neonatal nursing field at the public hospital where she had worked. The other half was used to fund an independent, civilian-led oversight committee that provided free legal representation for victims of police misconduct across the state. On a warm spring afternoon, a year after the incident, Senator Thomas Reed stood next to his mother on the steps of the newly dedicated nursing wing at the city hospital. Evelyn's shoulder had healed. She looked radiant, her head held high, the very picture of unbreakable grace. Thomas looked down at her, placing a gentle hand on her back. "We did it, Mum. The Evelyn Act passed unanimously today. Nobody can ever hide what they do in the dark again." Evelyn smiled, looking out at the young nursing students gathering for the ceremony. "The dark always fades, Tommy," she said quietly. "You just have to be willing to stand in the rain long enough to see the sunrise. The scales of justice may sometimes tip, but when absolute grace meets an unbreakable will, the truth always shatters the darkness." Evelyn Reed's story is a powerful reminder that true authority isn't found in a badge or a loud voice. It is found in quiet resilience and the courage to hold the corrupt accountable. If you felt the raw power, the drama, and the profound justice of this story, please hit that like button. Share this video to spread Evelyn's incredible triumph, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, real-life stories of karma, justice, and the human spirit. Your support keeps these stories alive.